Thank you very much on this wintry night. It's winter actually already.
Yeah.
So it's an Arctic topic, may be suitable. I'm not going to talk too long, but I hope we'll have a good discussion. I want to throw out some ideas about the future of the Arctic and the future of Canada as an Arctic country. I do we need to tilt this up a little. Anyway, I want to talk about 3 or 4 challenges Canada faces and put them before you very briefly, and then we'll have a discussion. Number 1 challenge, just to list them, is a challenge of global warming. Number 2 challenge is a challenge of globalization of the Arctic, which as a region in the world is becoming integrated into the wider world, having been separated for so long. And number 3 is, in my way of looking at the 3rd challenge to Canada in the Arctic as an Arctic nation is Stephen Harper. And the 4th challenge is Russia. I want you to think, if you would, of the Arctic from a point of view right above the North Pole. You're maybe 300, 400 miles up, looking at the region in the round. You're not here in Toronto looking up to what is ours and what may go beyond it. Try to place yourself at the center of things and above it all, looking at it. And what you're going to see is a polar Mediterranean, if you like. An ice-covered ocean in the middle, and around it several countries with frontage right on the ocean. Russia is the main one. They have about 360 degrees of arc. Russia has almost half, pretty well 180 degrees of arc. As you look down, almost half of all of that stuff, and going way back south, Russian lands. Russia, the biggest country in the world. There's Russia there. Then as you start to move west, you're going to find a number of other countries. You're going to find Finland, you're going to find Sweden, you're going to find Norway. A bit further south, you'll find Iceland. A bit further west again, and going west, you will find Greenland, which is part of Denmark. Then you find Canada, the 2nd largest country in the world, and a country with quite a lot of frontage on the Arctic Ocean. And finally, you come to Alaska, which is the U.S. Claim to a presence in the Arctic. I'll say right away, the United States doesn't really understand itself to be an Arctic nation, just as the Alaskans don't really feel like they're part of the Union. They feel in some way as they're on their own, a bit like Hawaii, perhaps. In any case, what you have is a region that should be viewed in the round, a region in which there are a lot of troubles, but basically right now, things are going very smoothly. In the newspapers, you will see comment on a race for resources, all kinds of challenges to sovereignty, especially Canadian sovereignty, the need to worry especially about Russian military actions, and a Russian aggression that we see further south, perhaps being exhibited up in the Arctic. I say those things are unlikely at the moment anyway, but I want to talk to you though about future challenges, because I think the Arctic is, as a region, going to run into trouble. And that trouble is going to reflect upon Canada and cause us a certain amount of trouble, which I believe we should recognize and talk about now, so as to take countermeasures now while there's time, before all this stuff closes in on us. So I see bad weather coming ahead, but it's not there now. On the matter of global warming, what I see is global warming out of control pretty well. We in Canada are setting a very bad example, but we're not the worst. The world is heating up, and not enough is being done to contain greenhouse gas emissions, which are rising at a more rapid rate. If this whole thing of global warming starts to really get away from us, and we are faced with the risk of supercharged heating, there's going to be a meeting of minds, I would think, about emergency action to try and cut back on the warming, maybe even stop it altogether. How is this to be done? This is again an emergency response. When everything else has failed, we just cannot seem to cope. The response, I think, is going to be one of geoengineering. This means finding ways, among other things, to reduce the strength of the sun's rays on the Earth, to reduce the heat that we feel from the sun. One way to do this is to put sulfur into the stratosphere, high above the Earth, and to put it there by high-flying aircraft, which would just blow sulfur powder out. That sulfur would dissipate into the stratosphere quite quickly and serve to bounce a certain amount of solar radiation back into space. It would stop it from coming to Earth, and as a result would cool the Earth. In other words, we are these days polluting the Earth with carbon, which we're burning when we burn fossil fuels, and there's all kinds of carbon pollution in the Earth. The answer for this kind of geoengineering is to pollute still further. You add sulfur pollution, and basically you find a way to go ahead and burn as much fossil fuel as you like, as long as you shield the Earth and keep it cool. This is a crazy thing, I can talk more about it. But how is it going to happen? It's got lots of dangers, lots of troubles. It's hard to predict how this kind of thing would play out in the Himalayas, for instance, what it would do to the monsoon, what it would do, therefore, to the lives of tens of thousands or millions of people downstream or downhill from the Himalayas. One way it may be approached is to do small-scale testing. One way it might be tested might be in the Arctic, where the 8 Arctic countries, instead of 198 or whatever represented the United Nations, would get together and decide, okay, we're going to test this out. There is an emergency. And in fact, if it's done right, I don't know if it should be done at all, but we can talk about this, but if it were done, it'd be better done before the emergency. See if it works. Test it out, and to know that it's there if you need it. In which case, Canada might be a place where the use of sulfur in the upper atmosphere of the stratosphere might be tested. We might even offer to do it. I would say this would be in keeping with current government policy in a way today, because we are making ourselves out to be an energy superpower. We're keen on burning more and more oil and gas. We're keen on polluting the atmosphere. We're keen, it would seem, on global warming, even though the Prime Minister denies it. I think what should happen at a minimum is there should be a lot of discussion of this kind of thing in Canada before it comes down upon us. Number 2, globalization. The Arctic is becoming integrated into the wider world in all kinds of ways. It is becoming a source of oil and gas reserves that is immense. All kinds of oil and gas undiscovered are thought to be located in the Arctic region. By the way, I should define the Arctic for you as those parts of the Earth's landmass that lie north of the tree line. That is Arctic. Everything north of the tree line. And there are lines out at sea that you can use to delineate where the Arctic is. As the world heats, the tree line moves north, and the Arctic shrinks, actually, because the world is changing and the Arctic is being transformed. Well, you've got globalization going on, and all kinds of factors are now coming into play. The Arctic is a scene for Arctic marine transportation, as a scene for new military maneuvers. The Russians in particular are interested in the Arctic, it would seem, as an area to show their military strength. I think there's a lot of bravado and a lot of BS, actually, in the way the Russians are talking about this stuff. They are proposing to buy new resources, reactivate Arctic military bases, do this, that, and the other. And they claim they are doing so to protect their own Arctic resources. I don't think this is for real, but nevertheless, there is a danger that these kind of things may turn into real commitments. Canada, by the way, has been making all kinds of sounds about being stronger in the Arctic. Harper's proposed to equip us with Arctic patrol vessels. These have not happened. He's proposed to create a saltwater port in the Arctic. That has not happened. There's all kinds of things that have been proposed that do not happen. I think the Russians are rather like that too, proposing to talk about things. But there is a risk of globalization going on, and it includes the use of a ice-reduced Arctic as a scene for military operations. Right now that is not on, but the ice is thinning in the Arctic at a rapid rate, and transportation by commercial ships is becoming increasingly likely, but naval vessels are going to follow. I would expect before too long you will be seeing Chinese, maybe Japanese, who knows, Indian vessels in the Arctic, as well as United States, other NATO countries' vessels, and of course Russian. These things are going to create a situation where it's important to have strength in the Arctic, military strength, in a way that Canada does not now have. We have a problem with the Northwest Passage in that we claim exclusive jurisdiction over all the waters that lie between the islands of the Canadian Arctic archipelago. A vast thousands of islands, large, and some quite large, and many, many small. We say all of those waters are internal Canadian waters. They're ours as much as Lake Winnipeg is ours. The Americans and almost everybody except the Russians disagrees. They say these waters are part of an international strait that connects two high seas areas, the Atlantic and the Pacific, and today everybody has the right to navigate through the waters of the Northwest Passage. And if you imagine a militarized Arctic down the road, where there is a need, for instance, for the United States at short order to bolster a naval presence in the China Sea to defend Taiwan against China, the United States may need to move vessels through the Northwest Passage to get there fast, because the Panama Canal is not big enough to take a carrier-based task force. We might then have a U.S. request to use the Northwest Passage, or we might well have a need to be able to tell the United States we can see to it that their vessels, if they need to use the Arctic and indeed the Northwest Passage, their vessels are going to be defended. We have to, in other words, be able in this kind of environment to be able to defend the Northwest Passage, all the passageways in the Arctic archipelago, to a degree we do not now have to. There are various ways to defend the Northwest Passage. Number one is to mine it, put mines in between the islands of the Canadian Arctic. This is crazy. Nobody will do it, but it has been suggested. The only other way is to defend offshore, to defend against a foreign incursion and to maintain sovereignty over these waters by defending offshore. This means getting an oceanic navy such as we don't have. A navy capable of dealing with foreign nuclear-powered submarines and all kinds of other vessels. This would break the Canadian defense piggy bank, I can tell you. And it's something we have to think of ahead of time and guard against. In other words, we need to be careful about avoiding a trend of events that makes for the militarization of the Arctic. One way we might start also to think about this would be to think indeed of internationalizing the Northwest Passage. That is to treat the Northwest Passage as an international strait, and to insist that all other states behave according to international law as it governs this international straits. This is a radical proposal, but there is something coming up very soon called a polar code. This is a code for navigation in ice-covered waters, Antarctic and Arctic. Canada started the whole process that has led to this code, which should be out next year. The provisions of this internationally adopted code will be in some ways probably superior to the provisions we have governing commercial navigation in the waters of the Canadian Arctic archipelago. We could perhaps adopt and support that polar code, and indeed use it as a base to call for a law of the nations that we can live with, that would govern the Northwest Passage and would eliminate a lot of the conflict we have with most of the maritime nations, the United States in particular.